Welcome to Kids Stories, Chapter Books, and more. Today's chapter book is Dearie, A Tale of Courage, written by Gita V. Reddy, narrated by Susie Hackle. Copyright 2014, Gita V. Reddy. Chapter 1. Weakling. The wise old doe looked at Dearie. Never was born such a delicate fawn in the forest. She murmured, "The poor little thing will not live through the night. How his heart palpitates through his skinny ribs. I'm sure he'll die." Mamma Dear gazed at Dearie, and her heart melted with love. What huge night-black eyes he had! When his velvety nose started to quiver, she began licking him all over. Dearie shut his eyes and lay still. Mamma Dear nudged him and stood up. "Don't make him stand," cautioned the wise old doe. "He's weak. His heart is beating very fast, as if he's been running for miles." Mamma Dear lay down beside Dearie and resumed licking his face. "Yes," she thought, and grew fearful. "The wise old one is right. Dearie is very frail. His legs are too thin to support him. What will become of him?" Papa Deer came along with the herd. He bent down and gently prodded Dearie with the side of one antler. A shiver ran through Dearie, but he did not open his eyes. The stags and the does stood in a close circle and looked at Dearie. The wise old doe, seeing Mamma Dear's eyes upon her, sadly shook her head. So did the other members of the herd. They were all of one thought. The little fellow will not pull through the night. But Dearie did. By the next morning he perked up. He looked around with interest, and when Mamma Dear nudged him, he managed to stand. It took him 3 attempts, and his legs were unsteady, but hope blossomed in Mamma Dear's heart. When he tumbled down, she lay close beside him, filling him with love and warmth. Usually the herd kept changing its grazing ground, moving from one part of the plain to another. This kept them safe from their enemies and helped them in getting good food. As Dearie could not walk, the wise old doe said, "We shall graze around this place for a few days." When the herd foraged for soft green grass nearby, Mamma Dear stayed with Dearie. In the afternoon, when the others came back to sit in the shade and ruminate, Mamma Dear fed on the leaves nearest to Dearie and darted back to his side every now and then. 2 days later, even the wise old doe was hopeful. Dearie was no longer the trembling, quivering tiny bundle. His heart beat steadily, and he stood up for longer intervals. "He will live, I am sure," she began telling Mamma Dear. By the end of the week, Dearie was walking, and by the end of the month, he was running with the other fawns. Once again, the herd moved all over the vast grassy lands of the forest, seeking succulent foliage. Chapter 2. Timid. Dearie was strong enough to keep up with the herd, but everyone worried about him. They, particularly Mamma Dear, the wise old one, and Dearie himself, believed that he was the most delicate member of the herd and could never be as strong as the others. As soon as they caught the scent of a lion or of any other enemy, the herd immediately grouped around Dearie. Most of the time, they kept him at the center of the group to protect him from danger. Many months passed. Dearie grew big and strong and fleet-footed. He also grew very timid. Any other animal, even the small gentle hare, would startle him and make him tremble. when the wind rustled through dry leaves or dark clouds gathered in the sky, he grew alarmed. The list of things that scared him was endless. Sometimes he even jumped at his own shadow or his reflection in the water. He was at ease only when the herd surrounded him. At all other times he was afraid of something or the other. Whenever Dearie was frightened, he froze. He would stand still, unmoving, and stare wide-eyed at the object of his fear. Someone had to prod him to bring him to his senses. Papa Deer was the biggest stag in the forest. With his glowing white-spotted russet coat and huge antlers, he was undoubtedly the most handsome stag in the forest, and also in the surrounding forests. He was very brave, too. He had once led the herd in driving away ferocious wolves, even though the wolves had cornered them. He tried to help Dearie out of his fear. He often said, "Dearie, you must be brave enough to run when there is danger. You are not a foolish lion cub to rush into danger. You are a deer. A deer senses danger and flees from it. He doesn't stand immobile, waiting for God knows what." At the very mention of danger, Dearie would start trembling and his eyes would widen. He wouldn't even hear what Papa Deer had to say. Mama Deer would come to his rescue. "He'll learn. Let him be," she would tell Papa Deer. When? When will he learn? He's slowing down the herd. Any new sound, any new creature, and he's scared. Let him be scared. It's all right to be scared. But why doesn't he run away? After spending so many months in the herd, the least he should have learned was when to flee. Chapter 3. Frozen. Dearie's friends and the wise old doe also spoke to him, but it was of no use. When there was no threat, Dearie was the fastest in the herd. He ran so fast and took such long leaps that he looked like a golden arrow streaking over the green grassy lands. But when fear gripped him, he had to be pushed to move. At such times he ran in a blind panic, rushing into a headlong flight without seeing what was in his way and where he was going. The herd was a large one, numbering over 60. With good rains, there was plenty of food and water in the forest. As long as they kept away from the hunting animals, life was easy. One afternoon, Dearie saw a lion at the watering hole. It was drinking water. Mama Deer sensed his fear and said, "The lion will not attack us because he has already had his meal. Drink quietly, and we shall leave without attracting his attention." Dearie didn't hear a word. How could he when his heart thumped so loudly? And his blood rushed to his head. He felt hot and cold at the same time. "Dearie?" The rest of the herd sipped a little water and started to move away. Dearie stared at the lion, larger and scarier than he had imagined. Until now, he had never been so close to a lion. The lion lifted his head and looked at Dearie. Perhaps he smelt the fear that covered him. Dearie became rooted to the spot. His gaze locked with the yellow eyes of the wild beast. Mama Deer nudged him, but he continued to stand rigidly. The herd had already moved away. Finally, Papa Deer rammed him with his antlers. Only then, Dearie took a frightened leap and rushed in the herd's direction. When he caught up with the others, he was panting and his heart pounded with the shock of seeing the lion's face. Papa Deer was also breathless and very, very angry. Snorting out puffs of air, he barked, "Dearie, do you want to die? Why were you standing like a rock? The lion would have killed you if he was even a little hungry. You wouldn't have stood a chance." "Oh, Dearie," exclaimed Mama Deer, "to survive in the jungle, you should have good reflexes. The lion, the tiger, the cheetah, in fact, All the hunters are very quick. When they give chase, they are almost as fast as us. That is why it's so important for us to immediately take to our heels. A second late, and Dearie, their teeth will be in your neck.
Mama, Papa, I try to run, but I cannot. When I am frightened, my mind goes blank. I don't know why this happens, but it does, and then I'm not able to move.
The wise old doe stepped forward and said, Dearie must leave the herd. Chapter 4. Outcast. No, never, exclaimed Mama Deer. The wise old doe ignored Mama Deer and told Dearie, When you are on your own, you will learn a few things. Oh, wise one, Mama Deer pleaded. You know that Dearie won't be able to survive alone in the jungle. Why, the little one is scared of his own shadow. He has no reason to be. That is what he must learn. Mama Deer did not have an answer. She knew the wise one was right. But Dearie, how would he survive alone? It was like pushing him into the jaws of death. She looked at the wise one with despair and begged her to keep Dearie in the herd. The wise old doe spoke to her in a gentle voice. She said, Remember, I'm as fond of Dearie as if he was my fawn. Now it has become necessary for him to leave the herd. He has to live on his own. He has to learn his own strengths. Papa Deer stood by silently as Mama Deer continued to plead. Over and over again she said, No, I won't let him be sent away. You'll have to send me away too. Look at the other deer of his age. They graze with the herd, but now and then they go away alone. They're with the herd because they want to be with the herd. They can live on their own. So can Dearie, given a chance. His antlers have already come up big and strong. Oh, wise one, Dearie is different. He needs us. No, he's not different. We've made him different. Granted that Dearie was born weak, but within a couple of months he was fine. He had overcome his weakness. We, and I share the blame, have cosseted him and pampered him. Now before we do permanent damage, we will have to let him go, to learn to live without our support. Dearie, alarmed by the wise old doe's words, moved closer to Mama Deer. Oh, wise old doe, said Mama Deer, you're right. I'm sure you're right. But see how scared he is, how helpless he looks. He cannot even face a baby fox. See how he trembles. To leave him alone like this is as good as killing him. Let him stay with the herd. We'll make him independent gradually. Let him graze separately, a little away from the herd, so that we can watch over him and warn him if there is danger. Papa Deer shook his head. No, that won't do. If we are to be his eyes and ears and nose, when will he learn to use his own senses? It's not possible to keep him in the herd and try to make him independent. I have tried to do that. It won't help. He'll always know we're close by. He will continue to depend on us. You will have to let him go, for his sake. Without another word, Papa Deer and the other stags began pushing Dearie away. When Mama Deer tried to come in between, she was forced away from his side. Dearie tried to get back into the herd, but the stags stood in front of him like a wall. Suddenly, all of them turned and galloped away. Dearie stood where he was, too stunned to follow. Even Mama Deer was gone. Chapter 5. Alone. The herd was soon out of sight. Trembling, Dearie looked around for a hiding place. He had no thought for food. He wanted to quickly find a place to hide before any animal came and killed him. Close to where he stood were 2 large rocks. Dearie sat down between them. He couldn't see anything of the forest and hoped no one could see him either. The sun was setting, but because it was summer, it was not yet dark. A vulture flying overhead cast a large shadow on Dearie. Dearie cowered. From an overhanging branch, parakeets and other birds screeched loudly. Dearie was afraid that the noise they made would attract some big cat to his hiding place. He wished he had followed the herd. Surely, had he pleaded, they would have taken him back. The wise old doe loved him so. Night fell. Soon the big moon shone over Dearie. "I'll be seen," he thought in panic. In the gentle breeze, dry leaves rubbed against one another, frightening him no end. Dearie yearned for the comforting presence of Mama Deer. Every night he slept beside her, her warm breath fanning his face. Lying between the cold rocks, he wept in his heart. Just then, wolves began to howl. They sounded quite near. "They'll get me now," thought poor Dearie. He knew about wolves. They kept their distance from a herd, but when they found a lone deer, they surrounded him in no time and attacked to kill. He wanted to run away before they caught his scent, but as usual, terror had locked his limbs. He was immobile. The wolves moved away, and Dearie took a shuddering, deep breath. He closed his eyes. In the distance, a lion let out a big roar, the angry roar of a hungry lion. The sound had always made him snuggle closer to Mama Deer. Now, all alone, away from the herd, his ears standing up sharply and his eyes so big that they seemed to cover his whole face, Dearie stared into the night, terrified. He stayed awake for a long time. Even after he fell asleep, sounds, imagined and real, frequently startled him. Chapter 6. Day 1. When the sky was still gray and pink, Dearie stood up. His legs were stiff, and with the first step he took, he stumbled over a stone. He heard Mama Deer's voice in his head. "Avoid ridges and rocky places. Stay on plain grassy land." He carefully placed his feet between the rocks and walked with small steps until he was on plain land. The early morning silence was total, and Dearie hoped nothing would break it. He paused now and then and looked for a safe place, telling himself, "I must hide before anyone sees me alone." With his heart pounding in his ears, he searched his surroundings. Just as the birds began their chirping, Dearie came upon a clump of trees. Beyond it was plain land dotted with bushes. Dearie did not rush ahead. He remembered an important lesson. A deer must scent check the wind often. The light breeze was blowing from the direction of the trees. Dearie licked his nose to smell better and sniffed, trying to catch the scent of any enemy that might be lurking around. All was clear. Relieved, he thought, "I'll stay here. It's safe. I can hide among the trees. There is also the plain ground. I can run away if there is any danger." Dearie spent the morning browsing. There were plenty of tender shoots on the ground and leaves on the lower branches. He grazed to his heart's content. Then he rested in the dappled shade of a tree. It was the perfect camouflage for his reddish-brown coat with its white spots. Dearie was in the forest of his birth, but he did not know it well. He had always been in the center of the herd, too scared to look around. Now he gazed at everything with wonder. He began to feel thirsty. "I'll have to look for water," he thought, and stood up. Reluctant to leave his sanctuary, he lingered on for some more time. Beyond the trees were the plains. Perhaps the herd was out there. With a burst of joy, Dearie bounded off with a long leap and galloped down the plain. But the herd was nowhere in sight. Dearie reached the watering hole and slowed down. Walking in the shadows, he carefully looked around to see whether the yellow-eyed lion was about. He was not. Dearie softly came to the water and quenched his thirst. He was nervous, and yet a part of him was proud that all alone, for the first time, he had sought out the watering hole. He wished that Papa Deer could see him. His cousins, the black bucks, were arriving. Their glossy black and white coats and majestic spiraled horns caught Dearie's eye immediately. He did not want to tell them why he was alone. He moved back into the shadows and waited for them to drink and leave. After they left, he decided to spend some time at the watering hole. Chapter 7. In Hiding. Dearie watched the birds catching fish from the river. There was a flamingo, some herons, and a kingfisher. The flamingo and the herons stood in the water and picked up a fish now and then. But the kingfisher flew down from his perch on a tree and dived into the river. He was very clever. He seemed to know the exact spot where he would find fish. He did this again and again. Dearie continued to watch him. He was so engrossed in the kingfisher's antics that he forgot where he was. When he looked down, he saw a huge crocodile emerging from the muddy waters and coming towards him. Dearie watched its swift, silent approach, and the glassy, protruding eyes mesmerized him. The crocodile was now quite near, and the sun rays shone on its scaly back in the clear, flowing water. Dearie continued to stand, hypnotized, as if waiting to go into the jaws of the crocodile. When the crocodile was just a foot away, Dearie managed to move. With leaps and bounds, he ran back into the forest, unmindful of where he was going. When he stopped, he was in a different part of the forest. Exhausted, he rested there that night. The next morning, he looked around. It was all dense jungle. A small stream trickled between rocks nearby. Dearie knew he should not stay there. The wise old doe had often told him and the other fawns, "Never go deep into the jungle. Always stay close to the plains." In spite of that, Dearie stayed on for the time being because the spot had plenty of food and water. For a week he lived by himself. Though there wasn't much grass, the branches of the trees hung low, and he could easily reach their tender leaves. The place was cool and isolated. Except for some squirrels and rabbits, Dearie did not see any other animal. He browsed in the mornings and in the evenings and rested in between. Dearie became lonely. He longed for the herd. He hoped their scent would waft his way. The lack of exercise was also making him restless. He was used to moving every day, but he had spent 1 week in the same place. He looked for the herd, but he never went far. The dark and gloomy jungle drove him back. Chapter 8. Determined. One night, Dearie heard a tiger prowling. It was coming towards Dearie's hiding place. Dearie began to run. He ran as fast as he could. It was dark, and the trees grew close. His antlers crashed against the low branches. Yet he ran on. He continued to run long after he ceased to hear the tiger. When he stopped, he was in a part of the jungle where mostly elephants lived. Dearie had always been scared of elephants. Their enormous size, their color, and their big tusks had made him run away the first time he had seen them. Papa Deer had scolded him. "They're our friends, grass-eaters like we are." Yet his fear had remained. Dearie hesitated as he came upon a herd of elephants. They were sleeping. What was he to do? All around was the dark jungle, alive with big cats roaming for food. He had to choose between them and the elephants. The elephants were asleep. He did not have to look at their tusks or trunks, he told himself, and moved closer. One big elephant looked up at him and went back to sleep. Dearie lay down at the edge of the group and slept. Strangely, the presence of the elephant herd comforted him. In the morning, Dearie watched the elephants. They were playing in the lake, splashing water on one another. Dearie felt very lonely, roaming the jungle alone, an outcast. As he watched the elephants play, he decided he would find his herd. Ignoring the tender shoots and succulent leaves that grew in abundance around him, Dearie ran through the dark forest. He ran on, forgetting to be afraid, and came to the edge of the dense forest. Plain grassland stretched in front of him. Deer land! He stopped short. A family of lions was lazing in the sun. The parents lay on their sides, with their eyes closed, and the cubs tumbled together, playing. Dearie stood still. The lions had not seen him. The breeze was also against him. His scent wouldn't reach them. Moreover, Mama Deer had told him, when the lion family lazes after a full meal, it doesn't attack. Dearie's heart thumped, and his skin crawled with fear, but he had to go on. He kept to the shadows and walked away from the lions and across the plain, alert for any movement from the hunters. He walked slowly, so as not to attract their attention. When he was sure they could no longer see him, he broke into a run. He ran so fast that his feet barely touched the ground. Chapter 9. A Fighter. The herd was nowhere in sight. Dearie had run to the ends of the plain. He began to despair.
Have they all left the forest? Have they gone away forever? Will I never see them again?
Feeling miserable, Dearie wandered aimlessly. Again and again he thought,
Where can they be? They must be in the forest. Where else can they go? The wise old doe loves this forest. She won't allow the herd to leave it. Is there any plain I have missed?
Of course there was. The plain that he was always afraid to enter. With fresh hope, Dearie sprang up and ran like a streak of lightning. He remembered the small river bordering a grazing ground. The river was gentle, and the deer crossed it by stepping over the small rocks that stood in the river. Dearie had never crossed the river. For his sake, whenever the herd went across to graze, Mama Deer stayed back with him. Dearie was excited and worried. The wise old one must have led the others across the river to test me.
I hope it is so. If the herd is not there, I know of no other place to look for them.
He ran like the wind, raising a lot of dust and scattering the dry leaves that lay in his path, and frightening the smaller animals. He came to the riverside. Before he could step on the first rock, there was a ferocious grunt behind him. It was a big, wild boar, furious, and it stood right behind Dearie, ready to charge. Perhaps Dearie had disturbed its young. Dearie stepped back, but before he could prepare himself, the boar took him by surprise. It flung itself at Dearie. Dearie's legs buckled under the impact. When he got up, the boar was waiting. With its mean little eyes on Dearie, it let out another angry grunt and charged. This time Dearie was ready. He lowered his head and met the boar. The boar fell back, and before it could attack again, Dearie brought down its hoof on the boar and flung it aside with his antlers. Dearie stepped on the first rock in the shallow river and moved to the next one. It was so easy. He crossed the river without any trouble. As soon as he reached the other side, he got the beloved scent of the herd. It was a faint scent. The herd was grazing far away. Chapter 10. Braveheart. Dearie followed the scent and then stopped. 3 figures stood looking at him. 3 dreaded wolves. Finding him alone, they were preparing to strike. With soft growls and raised hackles, they waited for Dearie to move. Dearie cried out to the herd. It was a high-pitched call, sounding like a cross between a bark and a yelp. It was his alarm call. The wolves moved closer. With a mighty effort, Dearie leaped clear above them. He flew ahead in great big leaps. He ran on and on until he felt sure that he had shaken them off. He stopped under a tree. All that running had exhausted him. His heart pounded in his ears, and his lungs felt as if they would burst. He waited, slowly getting back his breath. There came the unmistakable scent of wolf. Dearie looked around and found it. The biggest wolf had tracked him down. Slinking between trees, it watched Dearie. Dearie followed its movements. The wolf sat down and stared at Dearie. Perhaps it was waiting for the other 2 wolves. Dearie moved, and the wolf got up. It began to circle Dearie. Suddenly, Dearie charged at the wolf. Surprised, the wolf moved aside, but Dearie was quick, too quick. He shoved his antlers into the wolf. The wolf fell to a side. Dearie tried to hook his antlers to the wolf, meaning to fling it far away. The wolf got up. He growled at Dearie but didn't attack. Instead, he started moving away, his eyes on Dearie, when a big hoof pushed it down and trampled it. Papa Deer's hoof. Soon the herd was there. Mama Deer, the wise old doe, his friends, and every member of his beloved herd. They crowded around him, and each one of them welcomed him back. "We've missed you so much, and most of all, the wise old doe has been longing for your return. Every day she found out whether any deer was hunted in the forest. We didn't know where you were, but we knew you were safe," Mama Deer told him. "I knew he would be safe," said the wise old doe to Mama Deer. "That's why I sent him away. I was finding out because you were worried." Once more Dearie ran with the herd. He had changed. He wasn't the timid, nervous deer of yore, but a brave deer that sensed danger and ran away from it to safety. Something else had changed, too. The smallest, prettiest, and daintiest doe of the herd always ran by his side. He made her feel so safe. The end. You have been listening to Dearie, A Tale of Courage by Gita V. Reddy. The short chapter book series introduces children to different genres. It attempts to inculcate the love of reading in all children by encouraging reluctant readers to start reading. The books also help early readers and beginner readers to become advanced readers.